Imagine a silence so profound that it swallows the sound of the wind itself. It is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of the aftermath. Imagine a landscape stretching from the rising sun to the Caspian Sea, where the cities that once stood as monuments to human arrogance have been reduced to dust so fine it chokes the lungs of travelers centuries later. This is not a story of a battle. This is a story of an extinction event brought about by a single human will. There is a reason why, in the genetic code of the modern world, there is a ghost that haunts millions of living souls. A ghost that whispers of fire, of hooves thundering like a drumbeat from hell, and of a man who did not just conquer the East, but reshaped the very definition of fear. We are taught that empires fall because of economics, or famine, or slow decay. That is a lie we tell ourselves to feel safe. The truth is that the greatest civilization of the medieval world was not destroyed by time. It was murdered. It was murdered by a force that the high walls of the East never saw coming, a force that turned the impossible into the inevitable. And the secret to how it happened has been buried under mountains of skulls and rivers of ink that dared not write the full truth. Until now. To understand the catastrophe, you must first taste the air of the world before the storm. Step back into a time when the East was the center of the universe. The Jin dynasty of northern China was not merely a kingdom, it was a monolith of gold and iron. They believed themselves to be the apex of civilization. Their cities were labyrinths of silk and stone, housing populations in the millions. While Europe was still wallowing in mud and superstition, the Jin emperor sat upon a dragon throne, surrounded by 10,000 bureaucrats, believing that the Great Wall, that serpentine spine of stone winding through the mountains, was an impenetrable barrier against the chaos of the north. They looked at the northern horizon and saw nothing but barbarians. They saw men who slept in felt tents, who smelled of sour milk and wet wool, who could not read the classics or appreciate the delicate stroke of a calligraphy brush. To the Jin, the people of the steppe were akin to wolves, dangerous in a pack perhaps, but ultimately animals to be managed, bribed, or pitted against one another. This was their fatal error. They mistook a lack of luxury for a lack of sophistication. They looked at the poverty of the steppe and saw weakness, failing to see that the harshness of that frozen wasteland was a forge. The steppe is not land. It is an ocean of grass where the weak die before they can walk. The wind cuts through skin like a knife. The winters are so cold that trees explode with the sound of gunshots as their sap freezes. In this cauldron, survival is not a right. It is a daily conquest. Here, a boy named Temujin was born clutching a blood clot the size of a knucklebone, a prophecy written in gore. But we are not here to recount his biography. We are here to dissect the machine he built. The history books call it a horde. That is a word used by victims to describe a mob. What Temujin, now Genghis Khan, created was not a horde. It was a nervous system. He took a fractured society of tribal feuds and welded them into a single organism. He erased the identity of the tribe and replaced it with the loyalty to the unit. The Arban, the Zun, the Mingan, 10 men, 100 men, 1,000 men, a decimal system of death where every man was accountable for the man next to him. If one fled, 10 were executed. If 10 fled, the 100 were slaughtered. It was a discipline more rigid than the stone of the Great Wall and far more mobile. But discipline alone does not conquer millions. The secret lay in the weapon that the civilized world mocked until it was buried in their throats: the composite bow. Understand the mechanics of this device. It was not a simple stick of yew like the English longbow. It was a piece of advanced engineering, a lamination of horn, wood, and sinew, cured for a year, capable of storing energy that defied physics. A Mongol warrior could loose an arrow that could punch through armor at 300 yards, and he could do it while riding a horse at full gallop, with all 4 hooves off the ground. This was the kinetic energy of the apocalypse. When you combine this weapon with the horse, the hardy, ugly, indefatigable Mongol pony that could dig through snow to find grass and drink the blood of its rider to survive, you have an army that does not need supply lines. You have an army that moves faster than news itself. The Jin dynasty was fighting a war of positions. The Mongols were fighting a war of time. The escalation began not with an invasion, but with an insult. It always begins with pride. The Jin demanded submission. They sent an envoy to the steppes, expecting the new Khan to bow and accept his title as a vassal, a servant of the Golden Throne. Genghis Khan did not bow. He spat toward the south. He climbed his sacred mountain, removed his hat, draped his belt around his neck in a sign of absolute humility before the eternal blue sky, and prayed for 3 days. He did not ask for wealth. He asked for judgment. He declared that the Jin had lost the mandate of heaven. This was the psychological pivot. He convinced his people that this was not a raid for loot. This was a holy war against a corrupt, stagnant Leviathan. When the order to march was given, it was not a chaotic rush. It was a silent, terrifying migration. 100,000 horsemen followed by herds of remounts, moving like a shadow across the Gobi Desert. The Jin generals laughed. They looked at the maps. They saw the mountain passes, the choke points, the fortifications that had held for centuries. They had hundreds of thousands of infantry, heavy cavalry clad in iron lamellar armor, and the finest siege engineers in the world. They outnumbered the Mongols 5-1. But numbers in war are an illusion when the mind is paralyzed. The Jin army was heavy. It was tethered to its granaries, its roads, its walls. They moved like a sloth. The Mongols moved like water. They did not attack where the Jin were strong. They flowed around them. They attacked the villages, the supply depots, the communication towers. They created a zone of terror so profound that refugees clogged the roads, blocking the movement of the Jin armies. It was weaponized migration. The Mongols used the Jin's own population as a human shield and a logistical nightmare. Then came the moment that changed the East forever. The Battle of Yahuling, the Badger Mouth. This is where the world should have ended for the Mongols. The terrain was mountainous, unsuited for cavalry. The Jin had choked the pass with their finest troops, a static defense of iron and spear. A logical commander would have retreated. A logical commander would have sought another way. Genghis Khan did not seek logic. He sought the throat. He saw that the Jin were packed so tightly they could not maneuver. Their numbers were their prison. He ordered a suicide charge. Not by his heavy cavalry, but by the light horsemen, wave after wave, raining arrows, feigning retreat, pulling the heavy Jin infantry out of position, taunting them, dragging them into a chaotic pursuit. And when the Jin lines fragmented, gasping for breath in the thin mountain air, the trap snapped shut. The heavy Mongol lancers, the reserves kept in silence, smashed into the Jin center like a hammer hitting glass. The slaughter at Badger Mouth was not a battle. It was an industrial disposal of human life. The chroniclers say the bones of the Jin soldiers carpeted the pass for decades, so thick that travelers lost their way because the road was obliterated by skeletons. This was the turning point. The Jin field army, the shield of the empire, was shattered. But the true horror was yet to come. The Mongols did not just defeat armies, they broke the psychology of the civilization. They approached the great city of Zhengdu, modern-day Beijing. The walls were 40 feet high, 40 feet thick. The moat was a river. Inside, the people felt safe. They had food for years. They had the technological marvels of fire lances and trebuchets. Genghis Khan had never besieged a city like this. He was a nomad. Walls were a puzzle he had not yet solved. But here lies the secret that most histories gloss over. The Mongols were not just warriors. They were the world's most terrifying students. They did not bang their heads against the wall. They captured Chinese engineers. They offered a simple choice: serve us, or watch your families die. And so the technology of the East was turned against the East. The Mongols built catapults. They learned to mine the walls. But their greatest siege weapon was disease and starvation. They surrounded the city and simply waited. They turned the countryside into a desert, ensuring not a grain of rice entered the gates. Inside Zhengdu, civilization unraveled. First, the luxury goods disappeared. Then the pets. Then the leather of the armor was boiled for soup. And then the dark whisper began in the alleyways. The weak vanished. The flesh of the dead was sold in the markets under false names. The greatest city in the world became a tomb of cannibals. When the city finally fell, it wasn't a conquest. It was an extermination. The smoke of the burning city was seen for weeks. The accumulation of grease from the burning bodies soaked into the earth. The Jin emperor fled south, a broken man, leaving his northern empire to be devoured. But the east is vast, and the Jin were only one head of the dragon. While the ruins of Zhongdu smoldered, a new insult arrived from the west. The Khwarezmian Empire, a superpower of Persia and Central Asia, a land of scholars, poets, and silk. Genghis Khan, now master of northern China, sought trade. He sent a caravan, a mission of peace and commerce, to the city of Otrar. He wanted the Silk Road to flow. He sent a message to the Sultan Muhammad II. I am the master of the lands of the rising sun. You are the master of the lands of the setting sun. Let there be a firm treaty of friendship and peace between us. The governor of Otrar made the mistake that would doom millions. He saw the caravan as a nest of spies, which in truth it likely was, and he saw their wealth as his own. He seized the goods and executed the merchants. Genghis Khan gave the Sultan one chance. He sent 3 ambassadors to demand the governor be handed over. The Sultan, blinded by his own arrogance, believing the Mongols were merely savages who had gotten lucky in China, shaved the beards of 2 ambassadors and beheaded the 3rd. He sent the head back to Genghis Khan. There is a moment in history where the door to mercy slams shut. This was that moment. Genghis Khan went to the top of his sacred mountain again. He wept. He uncovered his head and spoke to the sky. I am not the author of this trouble. The war that followed was not a war for territory. It was a punitive expedition of a scale the world had never seen. It was a war of annihilation. The invasion of Khwarezmia is where the genius of the Mongol war machine reached its zenith. The Sultan had a massive army, far larger than the Mongols. But he made the fatal error of dispersing his troops into the cities, believing the Mongols would have to besiege them one by one, bleeding themselves dry. He expected a conventional war. He got a phantom. Genghis Khan divided his army. He sent one force to distract the border garrisons. He sent another to the south. But he, with his most elite troops, did the impossible. He vanished. He took his army through the Kizilkum Desert, a wasteland deemed impassable by any army. They moved through the red sands, surviving on nothing, appearing like ghosts in the rear of the enemy empire. When they emerged at the gates of Bukhara, the Sultan's jaw dropped. The Mongols were behind his lines. They had bypassed the defenses. The psychological shock was absolute. Bukhara opened its gates. Genghis Khan rode into the great mosque, the holiest place in the city. He ascended the pulpit, where the imams preached the word of God, and he looked down at the trembling nobles of the city. He did not speak of strategy. He spoke of divinity. He said, I am the flail of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you. Then he ordered the city burned. The collapse of Khwarezmia was swift and total. The Mongols hunted the Sultan across his own empire. They didn't just defeat him, they chased him until he died of exhaustion and pleurisy on a small island in the Caspian Sea, dressed in rags. The great cities of the Islamic Golden Age, Samarkand, Merv, Nishapur, were erased. And here we must speak of the darkness that history tries to sanitize, the numbers. At Nishapur, because a Mongol prince was killed by an arrow from the walls, the order was given, kill everything, not just the men, the women, the children, the dogs, the cats. They built pyramids of skulls, one for men, one for women, one for children. This was not random cruelty. This was the hidden truth of the Mongol conquest. The terror was calculated. It was an equation. If one city resisted and was obliterated, the next 10 would surrender without a fight. The Mongols weaponized the refugee crisis. They allowed a few survivors to escape the slaughter, knowing they would run to the next city, spreading tales of monsters who drank blood and could not be stopped. Fear traveled faster than the Mongol horses. By the time the army arrived, the enemy was already defeated in their minds. They opened the gates hoping for mercy. Often, they found none. The artisans were enslaved, sent back to Mongolia to build a capital for a people who never lived in cities. The rest were marched into fields and divided among the soldiers to be executed. It was bureaucratic mass murder. But beneath the rivers of blood, there was a secret brilliance that the West ignores. The Mongols were the ultimate meritocracy. They did not care about your race, your religion, or your lineage. They only cared about what you could do. If you were a Uyghur scribe, you managed the empire's taxes. If you were a Chinese doctor, you tended the Khan's wounds. If you were a Persian engineer, you built the roads. Genghis Khan absorbed the intelligence of the East. He created the first international postal system, the YAM, where a message could travel from the Pacific to Europe in weeks. He granted diplomatic immunity. He exempted priests and monks from taxes, ensuring that the spiritual leaders of the conquered people would preach obedience to the Khan. While the sword destroyed, the administration built a lattice of control that was terrifyingly efficient. The collapse of the East was not just the fall of dynasties. It was the end of an era of isolation. The walls were broken down. For the first time in history, the East and the West were forced to look at each other. But the cost was a demographic scar that would take centuries to heal. In China, the census records show a drop of tens of millions of people. In Persia, the irrigation systems, the qanats, which had taken 1,000 years to build, were destroyed. The land turned back to desert. The intellectual heart of the Islamic world was stopped. Its books thrown into the Tigris until the water ran black with ink. The final consequence is a world that was shrunk. The Silk Road, once a dangerous path of many tariffs and bandits, became a superhighway under one law, the Pax Mongolica. A virgin carrying a sack of gold could travel from one end of the empire to the other without fear of molestation, they said. But the peace was the peace of the graveyard. It was a stability bought with the most expensive currency of all, human potential. The East was conquered not just by arrows, but by adaptability that the rigid empires of the time could not comprehend. The Jin and the Khwarezmians were old trees, stiff and brittle. The Mongols were the wind, and the wind always wins. As we reach the end of this saga, we must confront the final irony. Genghis Khan, the man who conquered the East, the man who possessed more wealth, more land, and more power than any human being before or since, died in 1227. His death was a secret. His funeral procession slaughtered anyone they crossed on the way to his burial site so that no one would know the location. They diverted a river to flow over his grave. Then they trampled the ground with 1,000 horses until the earth was flat and indistinguishable from the rest of the steppe. The man who wanted the world to know his name ensured that the world would never know his resting place. He returned to the silence from which he came. So, when you look at the map of the East today, do not just see borders and nations. See the shadow of the horsemen. See the cities that were rebuilt on top of the bone dust of their ancestors. The secrets of his conquest were not magic. They were unity, speed, meritocracy, and a ruthlessness that stripped humanity down to its primal survival instinct. He showed the world that civilization is fragile, that the walls we build are only as strong as the will of the men who stand behind them. And in the end, the greatest conqueror in history left us with a chilling question. Is the price of a unified world always a river of blood? The wind blows over the steppe today, carrying no answers, only the phantom echo of a million hooves, reminding us that empires rise and fall. But the grass always grows back. Let us go deeper into the machinery of this conquest, for the devil is in the details, and the details are where the true horror and genius reside. We have spoken of the bow and the horse, but we have not spoken of the mind of the soldier. What makes a man ride for 3 days without sleep? What makes a man charge into a wall of spears? The Mongol warrior was not a conscript. He was a partner in the enterprise. In the armies of the Jin or the Khwarezmians, the soldier was a peasant, dragged from his farm, given a rusty spear, and told to die for a distant emperor he would never see. His pay was meager. His motivation was fear of his own officers. The Mongol warrior was different. He was entitled to a share of the loot. The conquest was a business, and business was good. Genghis Khan understood the economy of war. He knew that a motivated soldier is worth 10 conscripts, but he also understood the power of information. Before a single arrow was fired, the Mongols had already won the intelligence war. They were the masters of the spy network. Merchants traveling the Silk Road were not just trading spices. They were counting garrisons, measuring the height of walls, noting the morale of the populace. When the Mongols arrived at a city, they knew who the dissidents were. They knew which general could be bribed. They knew how much grain was in the storehouse. They fought with the lights on, while their enemies fought in the dark. Consider the Battle of the Kalka River, a skirmish that happened as the Mongols circled the Caspian Sea. The Russian princes, arrogant and disjointed, rode out to meet this unknown threat. They saw the Mongols retreat. They thought, these barbarians are fleeing. It was the feigned retreat, the oldest trick in the steppe playbook, yet the civilized armies fell for it every time. Why? Because their arrogance blinded them. They could not conceive that a retreat could be an offensive maneuver. They chased the Mongols for days, their lines stretching out, their horses tiring, their formation breaking. And then, the Mongols turned. It was not a turn, it was a transformation. The fleeing victim became the predator in a heartbeat. The Russian princes were crushed. The survivors were captured. And here is the image that should sear itself into your memory. The Mongols laid wooden planks over the living bodies of the captured princes. They sat on these planks and held a victory feast, drinking fermented mare's milk and celebrating while the princes were slowly crushed to death beneath them. The suffocation, the cracking of ribs, the screams muffled by the floorboards. This was the message. We do not just kill you. We consume you. We turn your nobility into our furniture. This level of psychological dominance was the key to holding the East. You cannot garrison an empire that stretches from Korea to Poland. You do not have enough men. You must rule through terror. You must make the very thought of rebellion induce nausea. This is why the destruction was so absolute. It wasn't sadism. It was efficiency. If you wipe out a city completely, you don't need to leave a garrison behind. You can move on. The silence of the dead requires no guards. But let us look at the internal politics, the betrayals within the enemy camps. The Jin dynasty was not just defeated by Mongols, it was eaten from within. The Khitans, a people previously conquered by the Jin, saw the Mongols not as invaders but as liberators. Genghis Khan played on these ethnic tensions masterfully. He told the Khitans, "I am of your blood. The Jin are the usurpers." Thousands of Khitan soldiers defected, bringing with them the knowledge of the terrain and the secrets of the Jin defenses. It was a cascade of betrayal. The Jin emperor sat in his palace, surrounded by silk and incense, while the foundation of his empire turned to sand. He was fighting a war on the map, while Genghis was fighting a war in the hearts of his subjects. And what of the women? The history books are often written by men, for men, about men. But the conquest of the East was also a reshaping of the genetic landscape. The Mongols practiced a brutal form of Darwinism. They took the most beautiful women, the daughters of kings and merchants, and integrated them into the Mongol bloodline. But there is a darker, more subtle aspect. The Mongol women themselves. While the men were at war, the women ran the empire. They managed the herds, the economy, the logistics. A Mongol woman could ride and shoot as well as her husband. When the army moved, the families moved with them. It was a mobile state. This meant the soldiers were never homesick, for their home was traveling with them. They were never fighting to return to a distant land. They were fighting to expand the land they stood upon. This total mobilization of society gave them a resilience that the sedentary societies of the East could not match. Now zoom in on the final days of the Western campaign. The pursuit of Jalal al-Din, the son of the Khwarezmian Sultan. He was a warrior worthy of respect, perhaps the only one who truly understood how to fight the Mongols. He inflicted a rare defeat upon them at the Battle of Parwan. But this victory only enraged the beast. Genghis Khan came for him personally. He chased him to the banks of the Indus River. Jalal al-Din was cornered. His army was destroyed. He stripped off his armor, mounted his fresh horse, and plunged off a 20-foot cliff into the raging waters of the Indus. Genghis Khan rode to the edge. His archers raised their bows. Genghis lowered his hand. He forbade them to shoot. He watched the prince struggle against the current, reach the other side, and shake his fist at the Mongols. Genghis turned to his sons and said, "Such a son must a father have." He respected courage even in an enemy. But that respect did not save Jalal al-Din's family. The prince escaped, but his harem, his children, were captured. The male children were executed. The lineage had to be severed. Respect is one thing, survival is another. This duality is what makes Genghis Khan the most complex figure in medieval history. He was a monster who boiled captives alive, yet he established a law code, the Yasa, that forbade kidnapping of women, theft of livestock, and religious persecution among his own people. He was a destroyer of cities who sought out Taoist monks to learn the secret of eternal life. He asked the monk Chu Chuji, "Do you have a medicine of immortality?" The monk replied, "There are means of preserving life, but no medicine of immortality." Genghis accepted this. He respected wisdom. He exempted the monk's followers from taxes. He was a paradox, a barbarian who valued intelligence more than gold, a killer who sought order. The conquest of the East was also a biological war. The movement of the armies brought the plague. The fleas on the rats in the saddlebags of the Mongol horses carried the Yersinia pestis. While the Black Death would ravage Europe a century later, the seeds were sown here. The disruption of the ecosystems, the unburied bodies, the massive movements of people, it created a petri dish for disease. The Mongols were vectors of death in every sense. They killed with the sword, they killed with famine, and they killed with the microscopic hitchhikers that traveled in their wake. As we analyze the ancient secrets of this conquest, we must acknowledge the role of climate. Scientific studies of tree rings from central Mongolia show that the rise of Genghis Khan coincided with a period of unusual rainfall and warmth. The grass grew thick, the horses were fat, the livestock boomed. The energy of the steppe was at its peak. Nature itself provided the fuel for the engine of conquest. Had there been a drought, the Mongols might have remained squabbling tribes fighting over water holes. But the heavens opened, the grass grew, and the energy had to go somewhere. It went south, and it went west. It was a release of kinetic energy that had been building for centuries. But ultimately, the conquest comes down to the will of one man, Temujin. He was a man who had been a slave, wearing a wooden collar, eating scraps. He had been hunted like an animal. He had learned that the world owes you nothing. He had learned that trust is a weakness unless it is bound by blood and iron. When he looked at the soft, plump cities of the East, he did not see civilization. He saw decay. He saw people who had forgotten how to fight, how to struggle, how to survive. He believed he was doing the world a favor by pruning the weak branches. It was a dark, messianic vision. He called himself the punishment of God, and in many ways he was the inevitable correction to a world that had become complacent. The legacy of this conquest is etched into the culture of the East. The borders of modern China are largely the borders established by the Mongol Yuan dynasty that followed. The unification of Russia was a reaction to the Mongol yoke. The princes of Moscow rose to power by being the tax collectors for the Khans, eventually gathering enough strength to overthrow them. The Islamic world was forever changed, shifting its center of gravity toward Cairo and Istanbul, away from the devastated lands of Persia. The East was broken, melted down, and recast in a new mold. So, how did Genghis Khan conquer the East? He did it by becoming the East. He did it by absorbing everything that was useful and discarding everything that was weak. He did it by turning the very strengths of his enemies, their walls, their engineers, their roads, against them. He was not a wave that crashed and receded. He was a flood that changed the landscape forever. And as the sun sets on the steppe today, painting the sky in the same blood-red hues that Genghis saw 800 years ago, we are left with the silence of the millions who perished, the silence of the cities that never rose again. And in that silence, if you listen closely, you can still hear the wind whispering the first law of the steppe, the secret that built the greatest empire the world has ever known: submit or die. There is no third choice.